Every organization manages IT assets, but here's a startling reality. Most are spending 25 times more effort maintaining their infrastructure than deploying it. And the cost of doing this inefficiently are mounting every day. What if I told you that the processes most organizations use to manage their IT assets are fundamentally broken? Not because the people doing the work aren't skilled, but because managing modern infrastructure at scale requires a completely different approach. Well, today we're diving into Priority 2 from Worldwide Technology's 2025 Automation Priorities Research, Automating IT Asset Lifecycle Management. We're going to explore how organizations can move beyond the excitement of initial deployments to effectively managing the full asset journey from initial unboxing to eventual retirement. Joining me is Mark Wall, Managing Director of Automation Solutions at Worldwide Technology. Mark brings extensive experience helping organizations transform their approach to infrastructure management through intelligent automation. Welcome to WWT Presents Research.
It is good to have you back with me. I don't think I've ever had you on the research show. We've done some work together on other projects, but it's been a few years. But you're heavy in the automation, so you're perfect for today. Do you mind introducing what you do for Worldwide Technology, and especially as it relates to your passion around this topic and what we're going to be talking about today around lifecycle management? But welcome, Mark.
Thanks, Rob. No, great to be here. Mark Wall, Managing Director for Automation Solutions. So we really help clients do more with less, mitigate risk through various technology, automation, other components. And generally just be much more effective and make work, much more, delightful experience, and really excited to be here today. I know the topic is paramount to really, every organization out there. So I appreciate you having me today.
You got it. And we've talked automation it's like the new old topic. Do you feel like automation in terms of an importance to skill sets and capabilities of an organization's IT department, is this more of a need to have than maybe a want to have, as it might have been in the past, just trying to get more efficient? Do you feel like it's almost required now?
I think so. I think the industry, the world is changing with the sort of AI everything. It's forcing less of just AI, new and innovative ways to do more with less. So I think, we're seeing a shift in applying skills or, building automation to be executed by AI is another common theme. So being not necessarily a full-blown expert, but thinking of different ways to say, boy, I wish if I could have, this system talk to this system and drive this sort of outcome, that would be great, right? So starting to think in a more of a different mindset is really becoming the norm. And then just applying different, tactical things to start making changes when needed.
Well, Automation Priorities, Priority 1, which we recorded a show on, is around establishing a source of truth and the importance with that one. So with this being Priority 2 around automating lifecycle management, I wonder if you could kind of help us blend those two.
Yeah, absolutely. So think of, being able to, let's say you're, making, an elegant dinner, right? I need a source of truth or a proven recipe and proven ingredients that I have that I know for a fact is true, is accurate, and is capable to build and run. So you have all this great automation, but you need to know, where do I go to get that recipe? Where do I go to get those ingredients to be able to make sure that it's there? One thing I'll call out, just to go back to the whole source of truth, there's this concept of bad data in, bad data out. So thinking about when you're building a source of truth, making sure your data is accurate. Things like inventory, some of these other components are going to be key. So as you're thinking, and as we kind of transition to talk about automating lifecycle, let's make sure that your inputs, your inventory, and your policies, right, are really accurate, because that's going to allow the automation to be much more robust, rather than executing something that may not be consistent or with conflicting data.
Yeah. In the paper, it talks about one of the challenges that both makes this difficult, but also is driving the need for it is, and this is kind of generally called out, is the idea that we've got more assets and more kind of geographic locations. How is that affecting both the motivation for needing to do this as well as the challenge of actually turning the corner on it.
As part of Lifecycle, I may need to upgrade or patch something at scale. There may be a vulnerability out there. So the need to be able to deploy something globally at scale across thousands of devices is becoming very real time, to be able to secure a network, to be able to provide a critical service or fix a bug or an issue that is coming out. So the ability to drive scale, and I think that goes back to how we're thinking about the solving the problems. So if I need to deploy something across tens of thousands of devices, trying to manually do that is going to be almost nearly impossible. Plus, just the logistics of traveling or coordinating type of those across the board, data centers, co-locations, cloud instances, right? It's unachievable unless you're thinking about doing it in an automated fashion.
Well, is that where most customers begin to realize that something needs to be done? Because I would imagine it's not that they're thinking ahead and going, this will be impossible to keep up with. But I feel like for at least most people I've worked with, it becomes we're losing our minds trying to keep up with this. We're not hitting our goals, and the organization is losing trust in our department.
Correct. Yeah. And it's, there's the old term of, tech debt. How do I be able to mitigate and sort of sweep aside and solve the problem rather than creating a reactive approach to say, hey, everybody, let's, drink your Red Bull, let's stay up all night and get this done, versus saying like, well, let's solve the problem. But immediately after that, how do we think about a way to make sure this never happens again? Right.
Yeah.
And I think it's taking those opportunities when there is pain and you solve it, use that and be able to justify, building and integrating some automation to ensure that problem never happens again.
Well, even without the automation component being, a big factor for it, there's the whole notion of just lifecycle management itself. Mm-hmm. What do you think, in your opinion, where is organizational maturity right now with just understanding these are important parts of the life cycle? Because I feel like you got to have that before you can somewhat automate it, right?
Yeah. And there's a saying that I'm going to take credit for that I came up with, but I'm sure someone else said it. Pallet to production to pasture, right? So Pallet if we think about it, there's sort of, a couple parts, several parts about how we think about IT infrastructure lifecycle, getting it from showing it up on a pallet into production running. Then I need to think about how do I maintain and support that while it's in production. But something we're commonly seeing now too, and if you kind of think about the bookends of that, is the pasture part. How do I get it out of production? How do I decommission? There's a lot of automation to be able to, provision things to get services faster, but it's just as important in some instances to think about a decommission aspect or media migration. And that way you're not paying for assets that are no longer needed in use. They're not creating, vulnerabilities. Or you can be able to spin instances up or spin them down in a more, kind of efficient manner, should you need to burst capacity and provide that sort of cloud-like experience.
And it reminds me of something we'd always preach from a security perspective is we'd so overly rotate on onboarding employees, for instance, but never be good at taking them back off and removing privileges. But what you're saying is the complexity will continue to go up, and the full life cycle includes birth to death, essentially, when you think of your assets. And you need to think about retiring them all the way through, because that's how you make room for more. That's how your power budgets change. Yeah, and you're not, and you're accurately forecasting how much work do we have to do in terms of what we automate and do next.
Okay, exactly. Yeah. And just you kind of hit it on it, the employee, offboarding, right? Just the security vulnerabilities and some of the other paramount, marquee items we're seeing is, assets that are legacy that are running that people forget about that are under a desk or some other areas. They're still in all of these systems. So once you sort of don't clean up your toys, you tend to just say, it's a mess all the time. I'm not going to worry about it. So the security sort of landscape is continuing to change. So, while you're not cleaning up your toys anymore, well, it's not as efficient and it looks bad. It's also incredibly risky to the organization. So to your point, it's good to think about it from an end-to-end perspective.
Yeah. So pallet to production to pasture, kind of thinking of that full. Mm-hmm. And so that is your colloquial way of referring to the life cycle, basically. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of details that go behind those as well. I want to talk about, so every research paper has multiple action steps that I found are a good structure for this. There's only 3 of them here, but they've got a lot of depth behind them. Mm-hmm. And do I have it right, by the way? You're an author on this paper? Is that
Yes,
correct?
yes, I helped write it. Yep.
Yeah. You helped write it. So good. So if you change your mind on any of these things, feel free to bring that up as well. But on the action steps, just to call out the three that are here, we have quantify business value, select a use case or target a use case, and align these changes to a compelling event, kind of a piggyback. I feel like it's probably what we're saying there. But let's go through these one by one. In terms of quantifying business value, when it comes to automating lifecycle management, what are the important things we need to be looking at there?
Yeah, a lot of people start with time as sort of the traditional, saying, or hey, automate what you hate the most. What keeps you up at night? What do you not like doing? But we're also, seeing a lot of shift in not just time, but also cost or impact to the organization. So, folks maybe tend to say, well, this saved me 5 hours, right? So as you're trying to quantify something, don't just think about it in the time that maybe the employee or that team does to be able to implement something, but what is that something tied to? Is it tied to a new application rollout? Is it tied to a new service that's a revenue generating, core component for the business? So instead of just time only as we're quantifying it, think about like, how does this support and drive what the company does and the purpose of it, things like revenue generation, or potentially the cost. Hey, this is costing us X by having this running all the time. And if I automate the decommissioning, right, here's what I'm going to save, or I can get it out of the system and no longer have to, to be able to support it. But probably the third way, and maybe not so much just quantifying it, but aligning it to the business, is risk. So as we talked about a little bit earlier, is as I'm implementing and automating something out there, is it a service that's going to help protect? Is it a service that's going to be removed because that employee or that device is no longer in there? So as we're thinking about quantifying it, I wouldn't just only think about time in the traditional sense, which a lot of folks think about it, but how is this allowing the company to generate revenue or mitigate risk from an overall company exposure standpoint?
This feels like something both that we've preached for a while, but it's also something I know I'm bad at. But because when you assign numbers to it, one, it tells you it can help you realize if you're working on the right priorities for yourself in terms of, the quantification provides the ability to kind of rank it against other potential opportunities to make investments in, but also politically keeping it alive within the organization and being able to say, this is where it adds value becomes important as well, because we always run the risk of, even after budgets are set, it feels like things, especially lately, can really shift. And if you don't have a clear way to say, this is how I benefit the business with these activities and the return we're going to get, and not the same time you were talking about, but the time frame in which we'd start seeing those benefits, how fast does that begin? And what foundation does this build for us to be able to make things easier in the future? Because I feel like everything I've talked to you about in our prep for this and the reading that you've had me do has been around building a foundation that says, hey, some of this stuff is complex in the beginning, but it's all designed not to be something you're doing just for the sake of doing it. You're doing it to build better processes, because that's what I like about automation is that it's hard to figure out how to make a process automatable. But then once you do, your error rate goes down, your pain goes down, and when you move on to the next automation project.
In the late 90s, film called Any Given Sunday, Al Pacino's giving a speech in the locker room, and it's all about game of inches. So it's getting that core foundation of the team to work together. And then it's about the 2 inches in front of you, the 3 inches in front of you, play after play after play. To your point about automation, get that structure in place. And, pretty soon all those inches add up to, the entire length of the football field, and you get a touchdown and you win the game. So I think to your point, it's important to get that solid foundation, get that source of truth, and then look at the business holistically and think about, hey, how do I get started? You don't have to take a big swing, but how do I think about something that creates a flywheel effect in organizations and gets excitement, gets your team excited, makes your life a little bit easier? And I want to hit on what you said about budget too. It's, a lot of the work we do with clients is, whether it's budgeted, sometimes it's in between budget, but it's saying, hey, I had this problem. I have X amount of my budget. Well, maybe I can automate and build a business case and maybe get a little bit more and then show the impact after the next 3 years of what this can look like. So while it's important to think about it from a planning standpoint, there's always opportunity to think about, how do I be more efficient? How do I automate it? How do I, be able to, incrementally move forward, but put together a little bit of a long-term vision at the same time.
When you're hinting at this already, and I'm proud of you for holding back because I feel like you wanted to go into this, but when the second step is around selecting a use case. And I'm curious if there are some use cases that are typically chosen by others. I found a lot in this process as other companies are always looking to benchmark against each other and such, but like how big is too big? How small is too small? How do what kind of things should you consider with a use case? What's been your experience?
Yeah, there's probably two that we're seeing right now. One is we commonly see is zero touch provisioning. So a lot of our clients that are rolling out new infrastructure, rolling out new cloud experiences. How do I go from that pallet to production experience and automate the? I plug it in, it phones home, and it lights up and it's working. That's pretty much the standard we're seeing in a lot of the industry now. And I think what's important about zero touch provisioning, it doesn't just accelerate the, getting a device onto the enterprise network and providing whatever services it needs, but it's also ensuring that it's added properly to the monitoring system. It downloads its security policy. It has the right, access levels to the environment. It's built with a secure connectivity to and certificates to ensure that no one's tampered with it if you're sending it out to remote locations. When you use automation, it's not just about time to value. It's also about providing a secure experience and mitigating human error or bad actors or some of those other areas. So that's really the probably the biggest use case we see. And then probably the second one, and this is a part of zero touch provisioning, is test automation. How do I know when I do something, it's working correctly? So what we commonly see is when we do zero touch provisioning and we plug a device in, it phones home and it's the right configuration level, the right code level, we'll run automated testing to ensure that things are working properly. It's going to run a series of tests through the device, externally to the device, ensure that it's functioning in the right manner. But in addition, once you start moving down the test automation sort of, kind of paradigm here, you can build a test library of testing use cases. I can use those testing use cases to run against change windows. Before I implement a change, I could run an automated series of 50 tests within a minute, make my change, hopefully automated, and then run those same tests again afterwards to ensure that it's the right experience and provide a better ability to be able to ensure that things are working properly at a substantial improvement in velocity. So zero touch provisioning to be able to get devices and get infrastructure going securely, effectively, and then test automation to ensure I can perform tests at great speed and make it highly repeatable that I can use for other parts of the organization.
I love that. I assume you start nailing zero touch provisioning. That has obvious benefits as you expand. Does the same thing work in reverse in terms of contraction and decommissioning as you put things out to pasture and doing that in a regular basis?
Exactly. The concept of provisioning something and adding it into the environment, you just sort of reverse that. And then the same systems and the same policies that you're adding, you're removing. A lot of folks, as they're migrating out of data centers, as they're refreshing their environments, what have you, it takes so long to do that they're constantly paying renewals and support on, thousands or tens of thousands of devices in some instances. So if you can automate it getting into production quickly, you can maybe depreciate it faster. If you can get it out of production quickly, maybe you don't have to spend that large support renewal that comes up. So we're seeing clients say substantial in the millions of dollars by sort of operating more effectively outside of just being more efficient at the time standpoint. It makes substantial impacts when you scale that across the larger infrastructure landscape.
It's so funny because I know this is human nature, even though I'll beat myself up for it, but I feel like I tend to not do things that have a perceived level of complexity and thought and multiple steps that go through them. And essentially, that's kind of that hurdle you get through when you're automating, is you automate that so that you don't have to have that mental anguish.
You build the button to push, but what's also important is you can build that button and expose it to other teams to push as well. perfect example is sometimes I mentioned the test automation, the change control windows. So maybe I'm a little bit behind, or I'm getting ready for the next season of Three Body Problem on Netflix. So if there's a big change window coming up, right, maybe I can perform my change, validate it, but there's test automation that I built. Maybe I can hand that over to the application teams. Maybe I can allow them to self-service validate without having to call me and wake me up. So what's important about automation is it's not just for you to push the button faster.
That's a good point.
But expose that for other people can be able to push those buttons for you. So you kind of move from a button pusher to a button builder is sort of the mentality in a lot of cases.
But you as IT, you're of course putting the right controls around that. They can, and what they're going to, the buttons are allowed to push, obviously only going to do certain things, but you're also giving control to the people who may own the majority of that budget, or certainly own the understanding of when it's time or ready. And leaving them ownership also helps them understand all the parts of their operation that you wish sometimes that they would quit forgetting about. You know, like, oh yeah, we probably are going to need more server space. What do you mean you don't have room in the data center? And we're rolling out this campaign next week. No.
I can't tell you how many clients we're working with that are at massive scale with the whole AI sort of paradigm, decommissioning their legacy environments to free up power and cooling for their high performance, GPU based AI architecture.
Because they're trying to find space and power and everything wherever they can.
Exactly. So that's such a hot topic right now for a lot of folks, is getting it in and then getting it out seems to be the name of the game.
On the steps, good. Quantify business value is step number 1, and then select a use case for action step 2. On the third one here, align to a compelling event. Explain what that is and why it's important.
Yeah, it's always important, to be able, as in step 1, to quantify things. But in a lot of instances is like, how do when is the time right? There's always an opportunity, but automation should be inherently a means to drive a greater outcome that you're trying to do from a business perspective. Common areas are things like, large hardware refreshes. If you got legacy environments and it's coming up on end of life, wouldn't it be great, instead of just doing the same thing we've always been doing for 20 years, is, well, could I automate my parts of the migration of my, network, large network refresh that's coming up? And that it's important for a couple of reasons is, maybe there's budget for that. Maybe the budget has shrunk just due to certain economic conditions. Maybe there's an opportunity to save cost in that overall effort by funding a little bit of automation that could be the ability to migrate and deploy that faster. So it's, common areas are going to be refreshes, or, large migrations are going to be, huge opportunities. I talked about data center. If I'm moving, a lot of folks are moving to more colo facilities because they're going to the cloud. So those are perfect opportunities to say, how long does this take, and why does it take so long today? Maybe there's parts of that I can automate, leveraging that sort of core automation foundation, and start stitching it into those events. It'll help you get budget. It'll help maybe save some cost that you could redeploy that budget somewhere else as well. What if I could shrink that from 6 months to 4 months? What's that worth to the business by asking for maybe a little bit, more to be able to build some automation? Or maybe it's a 3-year initiative, and to say, let me shift some dollars from year 3 to year 1, get the automation in place. And by the way, in the entire 3 years, it's going to be 20% cheaper, right? So there's always an opportunity to think about it by attaching it and getting things done faster and quicker and provide more value to the business, or just be able to look at it in reverse and say, well, if I automated, can I actually make this cheaper and a more effective outcome overall?
What do you recommend for people based on where you're seeing them today? What kind of resources do you guys provide? Where would someone start?
Yeah, probably twofold. So one, for really everybody, there's a lot of great learning paths on wwt.com on our website. And there's one particular around like kind of IT business. And it's a little bit of technology, and it's a little bit of like process. How do we think about what should we automate? It ties into a lot of the key themes. So I think one is sort of, being able to look at and develop skills and think about new perspectives, right? So do a little bit of sort of, research on that part, be able to look at what have others done, what is out there, maybe even asking, ChatGPT and others, like, here are the 5 things that keep me up at night at my job. How do I think about automating? Just get the ideas flowing and get some of that.
Yeah.
And then also we do a lot of series of briefings and workshops, and a lot of them are vertical focused to say, hey, this is what we see in financial services. This is what we see in, energy and utility, sort of landscape. And really the idea is this is how we can, get you sort of a perspective of what are your peers, doing and thinking about these things. Because chances are it's not just like, how do I provision routers and switches faster? But how does maybe a new regulatory change, or how does a new industry sort of disruptive technology fit into how I can align this and drive even a more substantial outcome? So I think the perspective of going to your organization to say, here's a little bit of insight and research that I found, both from talking to folks and getting a perspective of the industry, and then some of those core, sort of foundational, items that we have available on our learning paths to get a better experience and be able to sort of help get a plan in place.
I don't know if I'm saying this right, but I believe the learning paths are, and some of that is extension of the ATC. And the point that I want to call out is that you guys have a lot of self-service. Hey, I don't want to talk to someone yet, but I'm intrigued and I want to play and understand a little bit more. And so you can do that, and no human necessarily is going to follow up with you. You just need a www.com I say membership, but a login. It's no membership. You don't pay. I use it all the time. You guys are good with helping people think as well. So someone could come to you with open-ended questions and go, here's my situation and here's what I'm thinking. I don't have it all figured out. Could you help me at least kind of weigh some options? Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. We have an automation workshop, and it kind of goes from, ideation of, what are some ideas that I'm formulating, how am I thinking about things? And then in reverse, we can ask some questions and create a good dialogue of, what is going on in the industry, like we said, but personalize that experience to like, what are you trying to do? What do you struggle with? Do you know where to start? If you don't, it's okay. And then the ability to sort of bolster in these learning paths and some of these labs to say, here's what zero touch provisioning looks like. Here's the tools and technologies that typically we see. And really removing that barrier to entry and be able to kick the tires with like a really cool and compelling on-demand lab for you or your team to just get a little bit of stick time to get an idea of not just the bits and bytes and how it works, but also probably more importantly, the experience. How do I sort of go to my leadership and sort of say, hey, let me just show you what this can look like. I push a button or give the application teams a button to push and provide that service and that experience to not only myself, but the larger business entity as well.
Well, I love the idea of helping them sell within their own organization, so to speak, and not sell is the bad word some people come up with, but that's the reality, right? Is you kind of have to develop, people have to champion certain things for them to happen and overcome the inevitable organizational inertia that's weighing us all down, in terms of making change. But boy, this is good stuff to think about and chew on. Just as a final question, in case I missed anything, was there anything you wanted to leave us with?
It's okay to be not doing automation or maybe feeling a little behind the times. It's important just, every day, every week, every month, think about whatever time scale it is. And you don't have to solve the problem, but know the problem you want to solve and start putting a plan and pieces together, whether it's, being able to patch something at scale, whether it's to be able to deploy it or maybe some of the decommissioning aspects, and be able to check out, people in the industry, or check out wwt.com to just sort of get an idea. So there's a lot of resources out there. And again, using that to drive that game of inches and start driving outcomes quickly.
That's awesome. Well, Mark, thank you so much.
Thanks, Rob. Appreciate it.
Well, as we've explored today, automating IT asset lifecycle management extends far beyond the initial excitement of deployment. The real work and the real value comes from efficiently managing assets throughout their entire life cycle, from pallet to production to pasture. Well, the research outlined 3 key steps: quantify the business value to secure investment, select targeted use cases to avoid boiling the ocean, and align compelling events to overcome organizational inertia. Well, Mark made a compelling point that while provisioning gets all the attention, organizations spend approximately 25 times more effort on patching and maintenance. And by automating these processes, organizations can reduce human error, drive down operational costs, and increase efficiency, doing more with less. Yeah, that thing. The 2025 Automation Priorities Research highlights 4 key areas organizations should focus on. Just to recap, establishing a robust source of truth, great show. Today's show, which is automating IT lifecycle management. And then coming up, automating in support of AI implementation. And then number 4, embracing full context operations. Each priority builds upon the others to create a comprehensive approach to operationalizing, I think that's a word, automation. To download the full research paper and access the Automation Core Concepts Learning Path, I want you to visit wwt.com. These resources are going to help your team develop the skills needed to successfully implement automation across your organization. I'm Rob Boyd, and this has been WWT Research. Until next time, keep innovating.